Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Politics at Jack and Sam's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about British politics in under 20 minutes. And Sam, it is Budget Day Eve. Congratulations to all who celebrate.
It's October the 29th as well. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. And yes, there's only one day left of budget speculation. Thank goodness for that. A bigger celebration than Halloween.
Leading the news this morning is the condemnation, including by Britain, of Israel after its parliament passed a law banning the UN aid agency from operating in the country. That is making headlines all around the world. Keir Starmer has come out saying he's gravely concerned at the ban. That's a very big story. And of course, the other big story dominating everything is the American election, Sam, which is now only 1 week away. Can you believe it? We're almost there, but we're going to concentrate on the budget again, of course, because this podcast is about UK politics. How are we shaping up, Sam?
We'll have something as well on the Tories in a bit, but it's the final 36 hours before Rachel Reeves stands up. And I think the theme today is whether or not we're going to get the budget that we were promised, as it were, in the election campaign and the one that we've been expecting. Because I want to start here, which is one of the angsts, one of the many angsts amongst Labour MPs and Labour advisors and folk ahead of tomorrow, is whether or not what Rachel Reeves announces is consistent with the letter of the manifesto, the spirit of the manifesto, and the kind of things that the government was promising when Labour went through the election campaign. And it's in that vein that I want to start by playing you something briefly by the man who's been doing all the negotiations. And that's not Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. What happens when there's a big budget and a spending review is actually it's the deputy, known as the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who does all the negotiations. That's a man called Darren Jones. And he's given an interview to his local ITV station, ITV West Country, all about promises. Just hear what he has to say.
Do you hope that you will always be a politician that sticks to promises?
Yes. But look, if the world changes, you have to be upfront and honest about that.
I mean, I don't know about you, Jack, but I am very struck when we have a lot of Labour MPs going behind their hands. We're a little bit worried about when we said we won't raise national insurance, how raising national insurance for employers is going to go down. We get the arguments that the government is making about working people, but we're still worried about how it's going to land. In that context, for Darren Jones to be giving the answer, yes, but one of the big gambles of this budget is doing the right thing is more important than doing what was signalled. What do you reckon, Jack?
I think Labour clearly needs a story as to why some of the measures that it is taking now that are obviously going to be deeply unpopular, and indeed have already proved to be deeply unpopular, were not in the manifesto. It's not just about the sort of dancing on the head of the pin around national insurance contributions. Is, you know, the real heart of this, and I think probably what Darren Jones was referring to there was the winter fuel allowance cut for pensioners, which is still sparking enormous amounts of anger around the country, especially with winter now approaching. This is the point people are starting to turn their heating on and really starting to feel the pinch on that cut. And Labour needs a story as to why it wasn't upfront and honest with voters in the election campaign that it was going to do that. And I think that's what Darren Jones is trying to refer to there, is trying to make this case that the world changed on Labour when they got into power and saw the books. I think that the problem with the argument is, and if you watch the whole of that clip, you see a pensioner actually taking it up with Darren Jones themselves, is that they were so quick to come in and make that winter fuel cut. You know, the lady talking to him says, you know, why did you do that? Why was this like the first thing you guys did when you got into power? That really fueled that sense of grievance for people, in that they felt that Labour had this planned all along but didn't tell them during the election. I think the rise in bus fare hike that we saw Keir Starmer announce yesterday can fall into the same category to a degree, although the fact that it's come a little bit later at least makes it easier for Labour to persuade people that, well, we've been through the books, we've now in budget time, we've realised things are worse. But they do need some sort of argument to tell people as to why things are now so much worse than Labour had been suggesting in the election campaign. And I think what we're seeing here is the start of an attempt to build that argument. You do sense, though, that it might just be a bit too late for quite a lot of people who have already made up their minds and are going to remain very, very angry about this stuff.
I went to Birmingham yesterday to see the Prime Minister give the big speech setting up the arguments for the budget. And, I mean, when you take a step back, it really is quite remarkable, because at the heart of his argument was a line or a sort of a strand that bluntly Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves ducked making, and an argument that they ducked making during the election campaign. At its heart, he said very proudly, look, Labour will tax a lot more and borrow a lot more to spend a lot more on public services over the course of this budget. He wants to say that. That is precisely the thing he didn't think he could say during the election campaign, partly out of fear that the Tories would attack him as a tax and spend potential Prime Minister, and that might be damaging. Now they've got a majority, they can make the argument that they didn't feel comfortable to make, and that is just quite a shift and quite a jump. Labour spent years in opposition avoiding making exactly the case they are suddenly making in the sort of biggest picture way to justify things exactly as you say. It's just quite a handbrake turn, and it's not all just about the size of the inheritance.
The other big argument they're going to be making today and tomorrow, of course, is about the NHS, Sam, and what the sort of big announcement from the Treasury into today is of more than £1.5 billion of capital investment into the NHS. Wes Streeting is out and about this morning selling the positive nature of this announcement. He says the money's going to be spent on what they call surgical hubs, which I think is like extra surgeons going into hospitals and doing extra surgery. There's more scanners, more radiotherapy machines, and it's part of the government's pledge to increase the number of hospital appointments and procedures in England by 40,000 every week. But Rachel Reeves and Wes Streeting were out yesterday with health reporters and made comments to them that actually the thing that's splashing the papers today, not really this announcement, but the warning from Wes Streeting that this still ain't going to be enough to head off a winter crisis in the NHS this winter, and that there will still likely be patients on trolleys and in waiting areas and corridors and all the rest of it, and that it's going to take all a lot longer than, of course, Labour would like to solve. And so, you know, even this positive messaging that we are, you know, that we need these tax rises to fix the health service, it only goes so far, and they're very much trying to temper that message by telling people, look, if you're using the health service this winter, which of course lots and lots of people will be, it still ain't going to be brilliant. Don't expect, you know, wonders from us overnight. So that once again is a slightly difficult message for them to sell. To
be honest, Jack, I am old enough to remember when Wes Streeting made exactly the same comments on the front pages of the newspapers a week last Monday when we saw him in East London. This, to be absolutely fair, is the argument that they have been making all along, but they've made it again, timed to coincide with part of the NHS announcement. By the way, I think it is only part of the NHS spending announcement. I think there'll be what's going on in the lead up to the budget is that Rachel Reeves is concentrating on the capital spending that she's going to do. So that's the big shiny infrastructure spending. So she's talking about hospitals and scanners and things like that. But there will be another dose of money on Wednesday when people actually get to the budget to top up the day-to-day running. But the argument still holds. It's not enough. And you've got to remember that one of the things that causing problems in the NHS is the backing up of beds because of the fact that they haven't fixed social care. And in fact, they're going to require a big dollop more money that's not coming in this budget to fix social care. And that very simply isn't something that's on the agenda now. In fact, they've been slashing the social care budget over the summer to save themselves a few quid, and it's something they're going to have to come back to. I actually had a Labour MP last night wondering whether they'll ever fix social care in this Parliament if they need another dollop of money that would require another dollop of tax rises. Yesterday, one of the most striking things that Keir Starmer wouldn't do is he couldn't rule out yet more big tax rises. He clearly wants this week to be the last moment of proper pain in this Parliament. They've got to use this moment of maximum power to get the really tough stuff out the door and done. But even if they keep a little bit of money back for day-to-day spending and capital projects in the future, it strikes me there are just going to be more and more and more spending pressures that they need to satisfy, and social care is one of them. And actually, maybe the easiest answer is just not to fix things.
The government scrabbling around for good news things to say in this budget, along with the NHS announcement, which, as I say, is a sort of tempered good news announcement. The other one that they seem to have happened upon, Sam, is on the minimum wage. And this was something that the Daily Mail first got wind of. There's more details in the Times this morning that Rachel Reeves is going to announce a pretty big rise in the minimum wage on Wednesday, equating to, the Times reckons, a 6% pay hike for more than 1 million low-paid workers. That is a big above inflation pay increase for lots of low paid workers that would take the current rate from £11.44 an hour to something close to £12.20, which is getting pretty close to the actual what they call living wage, which is something calculated independently, which sort of works out what do people actually need to earn for a basic standard of living. And George Osborne famously rebranded the minimum wage the living wage as a sort of PR stunt, but it was never actually at the living wage rate. This is now getting closer. Labour have changed the way that the Low Pay Commission calculates the minimum wage, and it looks like it's going to deliver a pretty big increase. Now, that's a sort of there's two sides to that story, right? So lots and lots of people will be very happy if they're getting a pretty big wage increase, but of course those wages have to be paid by businesses which we're already expecting to be clobbered with an increase in national insurance contributions. So this is a sort of double whammy for them when they're told they have to increase pay rates significantly, probably more than they're expecting to, for their lowest paid workers as well. And you can expect a fair bit of outcry from them about that, Sam.
The other area that I think is difficult, now we talked yesterday, you mentioned a moment ago, the increase £2 to £3 in the cap on bus fares, which I think is one of those budget nasties that is caused by the fact that this year and next year, Rachel Reeves is squeezing some of the budget in some of the departments, right? But the Department for Transport isn't the only budget being squeezed, and this isn't the only thing, even in the Department of Transport, that could be a budget nasty. I'm told that there are other nasties in transport coming tomorrow that will be visible from space, but I think other unprotected departments are going to have really difficult announcements. I mean, one of the ones that I'm keeping an eye on is farmers. Now, the Treasury has always really dislike the kind of level of subsidy, going even back to the period where we were members of the European Union, and you got the Common Agricultural Policy doling out cash to farmers depending on land use. And there's been a long-running argument about what that level of subsidy should be. Let's just see tomorrow whether that is the kind of thing that becomes the victim of Treasury salami slicing. I certainly know there are some Labour folk who think that as a consequence of decisions in this budget, and I'm going to quote you what they said, entire communities are going to be upset by us, possibly lost to us, possibly forever. Entire communities. Now, let's see whether farmers are one of those. But there is really eye-watering stuff. It's not the biggest thing in the budget, but it could cost significant numbers of votes. And there are a lot of rural constituencies that leaned Labour at the election. The National Farmers Union was much closer to Labour than I think it pretty much ever had been. But is there going to be a backlash in rural communities about what's coming imminently? That is something I'm going to keep a very close eye on.
It's really interesting that, and it's reminiscent, I think, of the famous Omni shambles budget back in 2012, where George Osborne delivered millions of little cuts to millions of different areas of society and ended up annoying just about everybody, from elderly people to pasty eaters to caravan owners. And it was very much Treasury brain strikes again. These people who sit in the Treasury a million miles away from the real world, saying, well, we can get rid of that little annoying thing, and we can get rid of that little annoying thing, and we can make that a little bit neater, and that little tax change we've always wanted to make. And the outcome is you upset enormous amounts of people in just about every single sector of society. And of course, Osborne came under enormous political pressure, had to U-turn on his budget, and lost great amounts of political capital as a result. And you do wonder, Sam, if Labour, by boxing itself in and ruling out any of the big sort of what I'll call normal tax changes, like we're skint, we need to put up income tax or something like that, has left them in a place where they have to do a lot of the sort of salami slicing you're talking about, cutting lots and lots of little budgets from bus fares to everything else, and they may end up with the same effect of upsetting huge amounts of people in different sectors of society all around the country.
to be honest, I've heard something quite wild about the mindset at the top of the Treasury in relation to this budget. I heard that the kind of senior civil servants right at the top of the Treasury in this budget process actually worried that they've got their way too many times in decisions. Now, normally what happens is the Treasury come up with stuff and, the economic brains in number 10 and in the government departments go, God, no, we can't possibly do that. And there's a great big counterweight to the way the Treasury operate. And I think even the people at the top of the Treasury have been very conscious that hasn't been happening in this budget. There is just not the pushback to their ideas. They would recognise that, they go around operating in a particular way to a particular formula, and that the politics needs to be injected, but it needs to be injected in elsewhere. But the question, and this is quite a brutal question, is, I keep having this conversation with Labour MPs, are there enough big economic brains in number 10? Brutally, really, people with the experience that that you need at a moment of this. Has everything been subcontracted to Rachel Reeves? Is Keir Starmer just playing the role of chairman and then batting down cabinet ministers that have come to him with complaints? When people have complained to Keir Starmer, there's been a bit of movement, I've told, but not a huge amount. So if even the Treasury is asking, eek, are we a bit too powerful? That does make you wonder what we're going to see when it all comes out tomorrow.
Sam, you promised our devoted listeners a few minutes on the Tories at the end, so we better move on to them, as there is only now, 4 days to go until the new leader of the Conservative Party is announced. What would normally be an enormous moment in political life, however, this week it's sandwiched between a huge budget and the American election, so I fear that it's not going to get the attention it deserves. But very notable, Sam, that with a few days to go, Kemi Badenoch is going absolutely everywhere, doing loads and loads of interviews, having been rather under the radar at first. I heard her on Radio 2 yesterday, I heard her on BBC's newscast podcast, and I saw her on Sky as well with your colleague Sophie Ridge. So she's suddenly really going for it and turning up the throttle with voting due to finish on Thursday.
5 o'clock on Thursday it closes. I was very struck by the interview with my colleague Sophie Ridge, which was sort of one of those ones that I'm going to bookmark for months and years to come. If she wins, and I think she's pretty much the favourite at the moment, although the Jenrick camp would deny that. She is going to be a departure from anything we've had as a Tory leader previously. Look, for big reasons, but also small. She wouldn't say she wanted to be Prime Minister. She says that it's a very big change. I mean, it's just very unusual to get a politician who says that, not mind one fighting to be Tory leader. She was quite happily talking about the hacking that she did with Harriet Harman, that was worthy of a summary offence. But at its heart, her campaign has not a set of policy promises, but just an idea to make Britain more conservative, and she's got a really unusual style that we're going to have to see whether it goes down well with the public or not. But she seems very keen to ask questions about absolutely everything about the way that the government operates and the state operates and interacts with people's lives. And so it's going to be a wild ride if she wins. She's going to throw everything up in the air. She continues to have a style that some people will love and some people will not. But she couldn't be more ambitious in the way she talks about things. The question is, can she deliver what she promises in the timescales that she's got available?
There are certainly lots of journalists in Westminster rubbing their hands at the prospect of Kemi Badenoch being leader of the opposition, because she is just inherently interesting. Nobody would call her generic, would they? Just one thing to say about the Tory vote, Sam, is that there are reports that not that many people have actually voted. There was sort of this expectation that there'll be a huge flurry of voting right at the start of the contest, and most of the Tory members, we don't know how many they are, but we think sort of between 100 and 150,000 people would vote straight away. According to an article in The Sun, not even half of them had voted by the end of last week, and Kemi Badenoch, when asked about the flurry of media appearances that she's currently doing, she said last night, it's, quote, because people aren't turning out to vote as much as we would have expected. Now that is a really interesting dynamic, because as you know, Sam, if turnout in elections is either much lower or much higher than you expect, weird things can happen. It's suddenly all the polling starts to go out the window a little bit, and it certainly suggests that Tory members aren't particularly enamoured with the choice they've been given, and it means like the result is up for grabs. But unfortunately I can't tell you anymore because Sam's really annoying buzzer has gone off in my head, and that means 20 minutes is up and we have to stop talking because nobody wants to hear us go on and on and on for too long, do they?
No. Budget day tomorrow. We will see you then. Goodbye.
Have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow.